Hello everybody, I am Don9151, and you're watching the introduction to my Fire Emblem 6 hard mode 0% gross playthrough. I will be joined in this series by my friend and co-commentator Mekkah,
Hello.
and we will be using this video as an opportunity to explain some general things about the game that we're not going to have time to explain later on as we go through the chapters. The concept of the 0% gross playthrough, at least in the English community, was first started by Mekkah way back in 2009, so he's probably more appropriate for him to explain what a 0% gross playthrough is.
Yeah, it started out when I was playing Fire Emblem 8 and I got bored, so I tried to make it more difficult. 0% growth means that every unit that has a chance of leveling up in a certain stat, they have a certain growth. I set all of those to 0%, and that means they cannot grow anymore when they're leveling up, they just stay the same. So the only way their stats increase are through promotion bonuses, stat bonuses, and other things that happen outside of leveling up. And as you can imagine, this makes the game a lot more difficult. When I played it first, it was just to make the game a little harder, but Don took that even further and low-turned the game using this extra difficulty setting. So mad props for Don for that. And the first run that was successful in the 0% growth for him was, I believe, Fire Emblem 6.
Yes, that was way back in 2009, so it's been 5 years since I first played Fire Emblem 6 on 0% growth, and I've gotten a lot better at the game. Fire Emblem 6, as the name sort of suggests, is the 6th installation in the Fire Emblem franchise. Its full name is Fire Emblem The Binding Blade, and it might be known to most players as the Fire Emblem game that stars Roy. So this is one of the last games to be released exclusively in Japan and not to be localized in the United States or in Europe. And so that's why I'm going to be playing this game in Japanese. Now, there are English translation patches available for this game. I should point out in particular, one of them made by Gringe on Serenes Forest is pretty excellent in terms of translation quality, and he's been putting a lot of work into it. So if any of you feel the urge to play this game while or after watching this playthrough, I would highly suggest you to support his efforts and to download his translation patch. Fire Emblem 6 is the first game to be released on the Game Boy Advance, and it kind of goes back to the basics of Fire Emblem because the games preceding it tend to be a little bit more complex, but it's still a fun game nonetheless. Now, I pointed out earlier that this will be a Fire Emblem 6 hard mode 0% gross playthrough, so the only component in that phrase that's yet unexplained is hard mode, and Mekkah will explain what indeed makes hard mode a more difficult challenge.
When you think of harder modes in Fire Emblem, you usually think of more difficult enemies, and that's going to be a really important part of this playthrough. It's what makes it so impressive. To understand why these enemies are so much stronger than they are in normal mode, it's important that you understand a little bit about how these enemies are generated, in particular how their stats are generated. What the game does is it takes an enemy unit at their class basis and then levels them up a number of times. In normal mode, this is just the number of times above level 1. So for example, a level 10 enemy gets 9 level ups. Hard mode goes a little beyond that, and it adds extra levels called hard mode levels or hard mode bonuses. And this can be anything between 5 and 16 levels. And that makes the enemy that much stronger, especially towards the end of the game. If you look at the game data for these hard mode bonuses, it's actually going to say between 4 and 16 rather than 5 and 16. But 5 or 16 is the correct term for it, and we'll explain exactly why that is in one of the later videos. It's also important to note that there are some recruitable units that get hard mode bonuses because they start out as enemies. We will mention these as they go along, as they are very crucial to the run, as they are more powerful in hard mode than they would be in normal mode.
So the goal that I have in this playthrough is to complete it in the fewest number of turns that I can. And that's one category of playthrough called a low turn count playthrough. Another category of playthrough is a speed run, and that's aiming to minimize the amount of actual time elapsed on the game timer. And usually those two goals are at odds with each other, because in order to low turn count something, you usually have to input more actions than if you were to speed run something. But despite that, I've tried as hard as possible to speedrun this game within the confines of a low turn count playthrough. And the reason I do that is because Fire Emblem games in general tend to progress pretty slowly, especially if the player has to deliberate throughout the chapter on what he or she has to be doing. So that's why I've been practicing some of the speedrunning techniques. For example, when I move the cursor, I usually hold down the B button to move the cursor at twice the speed. And sometimes when switching between units, I will go into the unit menu instead of moving across like the entire map to reach another unit. Another speedrun technique that I want to point out it would be broadly categorized as RNG abuse. And a lot of players are actually familiar with RNG abuse, even if they're not speedrunners. But speedrunning kind of takes it to a new level, because when you're speedrunning, Fire Emblem has a really deterministic random number generator. So it's actually possible to basically know exactly what random numbers are coming up next. That allows me to plan out chapters to very minute details, and basically, in that sense, like the order in which units attack and the order in which units move, it all comes together to kind of make like this one synthesis of a strategy. So whenever I RNG abuse, if you see me move my cursor on a unit and then move the cursor to the edge of its movement range, then wiggle the cursor back and forth between two different tiles on the edge of its movement range, what I'm actually doing is I'm causing the game to use random numbers to redraw the movement path, and that allows me to sort of manipulate hits and critical hits and misses at crucial moments. And the reason why this is necessary is because if the player restarts the game and keeps starting the chapter the same way, then if he does the same exact thing every time, the outcome will always be the same. So in that case, it's not actually random. And in order to kind of massage the outcomes, I'm going to have to RNG abuse sometimes.
So one thing to keep in mind when talking about randomness in this game is how what the game tells you can be different from what it actually does. For example, if we're attacking an enemy unit with 77 hit rate, you would think you have a 77% chance of hitting, but that is actually not true. What the game is doing at that moment is it picks a random number between 1 and 100, and then it picks another and it averages the two, and compares that number to the hit rate number, for example the 77. And if the number is lower, then you connect the hit and everything is fine, and if it's higher, then you miss. What this means is that every hit rate that's displayed as below 50 is actually lower than what it says because of the way the probabilities work, and for everything that's higher than 50 hit rate, it's actually higher than 50% to hit. This is mostly an advantage for the player because the player tends to have smarter decisions, especially when it comes to weapon trial advantage and such. So it's probably put in there to make it a little easier on the player and make the game more accessible. It also means that it can be kind of hard to discern what the exact chance of hitting is, but there's a conversion table on Serenes Forest that you can use, and we will also be providing the exact numbers whenever they're relevant through means and not just through audio commentary.
Yeah, keep in mind that this true hit mechanic only applies to hit rates and not to, for example, critical rates or staff hit, but we'll explain that later on when that comes up. So Mekkah just said that we're going to also be providing text annotations in addition to the audio commentary. And the reason why we're doing that is because not only is there not enough time to sort of commentate on everything verbally, but also if we were to talk about numbers all the time, you would probably get bored and just zone out. And so that's why we provide the that's why we provide the text annotations. A lot of people also kind of dislike doing math, and so in some cases the unit has to kind of survive a risky enemy phase, and in those cases I will have already done the math beforehand, so you can thank me for that. I think that will be it for this introductory video. We will see you in Chapter 1.
See ya.